there's just no employment. I would say there's 80% unemployment in Tuktoyaktuk.
Sister Fay, congratulations on receiving the Polar Medal. What does receiving the medal mean to you?
Well, you know, if you would have asked me that a couple of weeks ago, I probably wouldn't even have known that it existed. And if you would have asked me, what does it mean to be up north, I would have said, I'm just a gospel person up there doing ministry. But in the meantime, I guess I've been doing a little bit of reflecting. And what comes to me primarily is the layers upon layers of people who are behind projects that help the ministries of the North and the people who have a whole variety of needs to unfold in a fruitful direction.
Your work in the North has been a second career for you. Yes. It was after your retirement. Can you talk about how that transpired and how you came to work in Tuktoyaktuk?
Our congregation always said, retire at a point in your life when you can still prepare yourself for a second career. So I figured when I'm 65, I can still prepare myself for another career. And I'd always wanted to do some missionary work. So basically, I had a choice between Peru, where our sisters were, or the Arctic, which Bishop Croto at the time had made it known that he really had needs in the Arctic. So I contacted him, and we had a conversation, and we brought our congregational leader into the conversation, and he just said to me finally, do you want to be in Yellowknife as a center for faith education because of your background teaching in a theology college? Or would you like to go from community to community where you could help them get started or, you know, gather the basics that they might need? Or would you like to be in one spot where you'd be planted for a while? And I said, I'd like to be in one spot so I could get to know the people. And he said, good, I have nobody for Tuktoyaktuk. It was as simple as that.
What is a typical day for you?
In Tuktoyaktuk, there isn't such a thing. Nothing typical. But I say to myself, my time, insofar as I have alone time, is from whenever I get up until, like, I watch the Mass on Salt Night because we have no priest, and that comes on at 9. And then I have a little bit of quiet time, prayer time, and the first time the phone rings, I just say, Faye, your day has begun, because then it just kind of rolls from there. So, and it rolls because it might be a day that there's thrift store or food bank, then people come to help get the food bank ready. They do Ziploc bags and organize clothing, or there's a young man that comes over and he's doing hours for assisted income, and he's absolutely a marvelous help for all that we do. So then I'm overseeing that type of a thing.
Have you taken up hunting and fishing?
Do you know what? I've done a little bit of ice fishing out in the Husky Lakes, but could you see me with a gun going out to get a polar bear? I've never gone hunting, but I had a beautiful surprise one time. I'd gone out in the land. We were actually there to do ice fishing for trout in the Husky Lakes. And this 8-year-old boy was there. He was going to go ice fishing, and all of a sudden he stops dead cold. He's looking up at the sky, which I can't even see anything, and he starts to make a goose sound. And he does it, and that goose up there turned around and came back in his direction. That's how good he was, 8 years old. So they know their trade, and they pass it on.
What's the biggest misconception that people in the South have when they think of Tuktoyaktuk and the North?
You know, possibly still having childhood memories of igloos, as I did, and, you know, dog teams, doing their hunting and fishing, and not realizing what's a blizzard, how do you survive, what about minus 30, minus 40, plus a blow, and what about trying to get through. Nowadays people don't have dogs. The dogs could smell open water. The dogs always knew the way home. Like if you're exhausted or wounded, the dogs will get you home. Whereas a skidoo won't. If it breaks down, you might have to walk 8 hours or longer and get lost in the process. Like you're on your own an awful lot more when you only have a skidoo. So people might still think of people going hunting over longer periods of time, like for a few days or even a week or 2 weeks. That does happen, but not too often. They often do day trips, and they're going out to get meat for their family. And not every family has a skidoo, so therefore they can't get their own meat. And even if you're going to fish in the summertime, you need a boat, and not every family has a boat. So I would say misconceptions are they can all more or less equally go get something to eat. Not so easy.
You talked about this earlier, but what are the pastoral needs in Tuktoyaktuk, and have they changed in the more than 10 years that you've been in Tuk?
In the Arctic, my experience of church is that from St. James' epistle. You know, halfway through chapter 2, he talks about what good is it to say to somebody, you know, goodbye and God bless you when you got nothing to eat and nothing warm to wear. And so St. James Church starts with very basic human needs and requirements of food and clothing. And that's where I started. Now, those are obvious things that are a little bit easier to look after, but when people's personalities have been crushed because of their ethnicity or residential schools or being absolutely uprooted from a lifestyle that worked for 5,000 years, and now they haven't got that lifestyle anymore because, honestly, the RCMP shot their dogs, and that was one way that they lost their capacity to hunt. And then the residential schools raked all the kids off the land and left the elders and hunters and babies behind. And so families weren't the ordinary family that we would expect. And they lost, kids in school lost their language and traditional skills and traditional values. So pastoral needs are growing out of those human experiences.
Is Mass celebrated in Tuk?
Yes, as often as we can get a priest, we're very happy. But most of the priests who are in Inuvik try to get to Tuk once every 2 months. But it's been longer than that since we were able to have Mass. We had nobody for Christmas. We had a priest for New Year's Day, which was a Monday, and we haven't had one since, and we're pushing well into March, and it's probably going to be, we won't have anybody for Easter from the south or the north. And so it's a lay-led church.
And you'd mentioned this earlier. I wonder if you could expand on some of the social and economic challenges.
I would say the main root of poverty is there's just no employment. Now, you can get different kind of figures, and you know, the figures always depend on how you're gathering them and so on. But I would say there's 80% unemployment in Tuktoyaktuk. Youth cannot ordinarily get jobs for the summer, for example. Not so far anyway, or it's a challenge. Young men especially have a very hard time. The main employer, for the most part, is Grubin's Transport, and Grubin's built the portion of the road from Tuk to halfway. And so they would divide up the work opportunities so that as many people as possible would have at least some work so that they could get unemployment when their service was finished. They would get enough hours in for that. Well, now the road's built, so guess what? You know, they don't need people for big equipment. They don't need people as much maintenance. So the young men in particular are even going to be in for a greater hardship. I think life for men in general in our world is harder than for women, but that's my opinion. The men in the past were hunters and fishers, and now, unless they have a skidoo or a boat, and money for shells and guns and gas, all that's required, their traditional purpose in the family and in society is not available to them. They have to find a new way to be who they're meant to be. And the ordinary way in life that this happens is you're that as a dad, and you're that as a job which provides. Now women and men share that, but in the North, women have usually more children, and they can easily settle into a somewhat satisfying life of having children, raising their children, sewing, cooking, and feel satisfied with their lifestyle. But for the men, if they can't hunt and can't fish and don't have money coming in, their ego just slides all the way down to their boots. They don't know who they are and their role. And that's why when we were using the Jeep to try and help young men get get a license to start with, because a lot of them drive in Tuk with no license, but with the new road coming right in, they've got to get a license. And within the first year, 99 people signed up to get a learner's license through Aurora College because of that project. Now, I'm not saying they all got a license out of it, but the consciousness went up that much. So for a whole variety of reasons, there is no fishing and hunting is commercial or could be commercial or is even allowed. Tourism is not yet developed. It'll probably grow, but how big that will come and what challenges it'll bring with it, they're working on it, but it's not flowered yet.
Are you optimistic about the future of Tuk?
Always. Yeah.
And what makes you optimistic?
Well, I'll tell you one that's quite personal. When I first went to Tuktoyaktuk, I could feel the pain, the resistance, the confusion, the anger of people against church and government and white people for destroying their way of life. And it was just kind of everywhere. Like they even say, we can't get our traditional food so much anymore, so we have to eat white man's food. So do you see, they're growing through their painful experiences. Now mind you, they like chips and pop and pizza and the whole thing. It's not all bad. But the answer, or at least the partial answer to what you're asking, is listen. Listen to their stories and feel their anguish, their pain, their confusion, their loss. And the primary listening tool was TRC. But even before TRC, Bishop Croto had already begun a healing project called Return to Spirit. Returning to Spirit, meaning the spirit of your ancestors, the spirit of God, the spirit of the church, return to your roots. It means all of that. And he had professionals work out a program of healing workshops. Over the years, I'm sure that I facilitated 5 or 6 people each time to go to at least 5 workshops. And all of that was prior to TRC. So then the people were ready to talk a little bit. And when they got to TRC, it started to pour out. And a lot of the families had never even heard their grandparents' story or their parents' story, or parents hadn't heard their children's stories.
Do you know how to say a blessing in Newman?
One of the primary prayers is always thank you. So I would say, Daigu.